Hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. So we have Emily Moore here, who's going to give a presentation, and I'm going to hand it over to her to let her introduce herself. But thank you all so much for being here. Can I adjust this a little bit? There we go. Okay.
Gunalchish. Emily Moore yuchat duasak. Kitchkan kudsiti. Ida kua Colorado yechat yati. Norway kwan Dutchhan. Atuthat jiaduatan. Achoe kiksadi ayachat. Kudanik yuchat duasak. Hello, everyone. My name is Emily Moore. Please forgive me for my mistakes as a beginning Tlingit learner. But I introduced myself as growing up in Ketchikan as the grandchild of Norwegian people. I now live in Colorado and teach at Colorado State University. It's wonderful to be back in Tlingit Ani, the lands of the Shitgakwan. So beautiful every time I fly back to come home. And I want to thank the organizers for all the work to bring this really unique conference together. I always learn so much here, and it's my favorite conference to attend. So at the last SOK conference in Wrangell, I presented a paper on Takwani, the winter village of the Tontaquan Tlingit, on a Nanette Island where Metlakatla is now. So this is down in southern southeast. You can see Ketchikan there at the top. And the three 19th century Tontaquan Tlingit communities that I'm researching were at Takwani, there on Nanette Island. And then today I'm going to move to Dasakak, sand all around at Village Island, just right between Duke Island and Mary Island and Cat Island. It's a tiny little island that I'll show you in a second. When I had spoken last in Wrangell, I'd brought up trying to trace some of this history at Takwani, where the Tsimshian came in 1887 with Father Duncan, and it's now known as Metlakatla. But the Tontaquan Tlingit name for it was Takwani, Winter's Village. And this was one source that I brought up just to remind you where I'm coming from the Metlakatla side. This was William Paul, who'd written in the Alaska Tlingit. Choosing a time when their enemies, the Tontaquan, were away at the Nass trading for their winter's food, the Chelquan raided the empty village of Takwani and burned it. When the Tontaquan returned, they found their village destroyed. Because winter was at hand, they moved back to Dasakak, sand all around, now called Cat Island, which had formerly been a way station. It appears the Tontaquan lived at Dasakak for one generation, but began building better houses on Cotton Tree Island, Kadukuka, Tongass village, which was closer to the Nass River. So these are those three villages that I'm really trying to track in the 19th century as part of this research that I'm doing on this area around Dixon Entrance, where the Tontaquan were really interacting with Kaigani Haida, Tsimshian, Niska people, Haida people from Haida Gwaii as well. I think it's a really rich area in that southern southeast Alaska that I'd like to see get some more research and more attention to. Since we're in Sitka, though, I wanted to just call out real quickly that from that village of Takwani, where Metlakatla is now, there are two poles here at Sheldon Jackson Museum that were brought from Takwani. And they're Tontaquan Tlingit poles. This was a photograph on the left when Father Duncan and the Tsimshian arrived in 1887. They found these old poles from after the village had been burned. These two poles were still extant. And Sheldon Jackson here in Sitka was establishing his new museum, and he asked Father Duncan, can I take these poles here to Sitka and bring them? So if you go, I know there's an open house later today. I think it's today or tomorrow at the Sheldon Jackson Museum. Go see those poles. They were Tontaquan poles. This was the newspaper article in the Sitka, in an old Sitka newspaper from 1888, just talking about how those poles were brought on the Elder. Okay, I should keep going. I'll run out of time. So after the village of Taquani was burned by the Khelquan, another Tlingit clan that I talked more about in last 2 years ago, the Tontaquan had to move. And they moved to this tiny island that's difficult to find a lot of maps to even show. But you can see they went from Metlakatla, Taquani on an island, and then moved over just south of Cat Island. And on the map on the right, I tried to highlight this tiny little island. It's only 1/5 of a mile long. This is what it looks like from satellite imagery from the geoportal alaska.gov, although I actually think one of the better photographs is by the legendary Hall Anderson of Ketchikan Daily News. But this tiny little island that you can see, the Tlingit word for it, dasakak, sand all around. It faces Felix Strait. And by the way, I apologize. I should have said right away that I'm doing this research with the permission of Richard Jackson, who's Tontaquan Tequedi, and his opposite, Joel Buchanan, who's Tontaquan Ganachadi. And so I had permission to go on to Village Island this summer with my uncle. It's a gillnegger. And so this is just to show you the kind of, we were there at low tide. This is Dasachach, the sand all around, this tiny little village. And if you look at this panoramic image, this is really warped, so don't be fooled here, but the back end of this beach is showing you how it's really close to Cat Island. And actually, apparently there were 4 houses there originally that were close to the Village Island side. So even though this is a tiny island, it had 9 to 15 houses, there's some debate about that, and almost 30 kutia, 30 poles. It was densely packed, amazing island. It's very curious that the Tontaquan chose this space for an island because there's no water source. There's no water source on Village Island and no water source on nearby Cat Island. And in 1969, as part of the totem pole retrieval project that brought a lot of these poles from Village Island to the Totem Heritage Center in Ketchikan, there were Wilson Duff and Jane Demert interviewed as many people as they could find. And Marietta Benson in Metlakatla said that the Tontaquan had their slaves haul water from Annette Island. So this was a really tricky place to live. The reason, though, for this is because they'd just been attacked by the Khelquan, Taquani. Remember, even prior to that, the Tontaquan had occupied the lower third of Prince of Wales Island, and the Kaigani Haida had pushed them out of that. So this was a difficult time, I think. And geologists and folks who study these kind of the nautical charts around Village Island have pointed out there are a lot of rocks. It's a very difficult island to approach. And they have a great view of Felix Strait, Revillagigedo Channel. So it was really hard for anyone to sneak up on them. And apparently that made it worth living on this fairly remote and tiny island. What I wanted to focus on today was some of the kutia that are still extant from Village Island and from Dasachach. And they were brought to the Totem Heritage Center in Ketchikan between 1969 and 1971 as part of that totem pole retrieval project. And there's a long story behind that project and this center that Jane Demert, Dennis Demert, if you know some of those folks from down in Ketchikan. There had been this really damning article written by Catherine Koo in the 1960s that really accused Alaska of not taking care of its heritage. And so the Alaska State Museum in the 1960s started to survey more of the 19th century village sites and seek permission from clan leaders to remove poles that were still remaining from the 19th century and bring them to the Totem Heritage Center. There was so much vandalism going on and removal of poles that even though clan leaders struggled with the idea of preserving poles that had never been part of the tradition, they felt that it was important to save what was still left in the 1960s. And so that's how the Totem Heritage Center came to be. My understanding is it's the largest collection of 19th century poles in Alaska. So it's a pretty special place. It's actually where I worked in high school. So that's how I got into all of this interest in Kutia. I want to emphasize that today I'm not bringing any really original or new research. I'm not making any big claims today. What I wanted to do, though, was to kind of bring back to light some of the early studies of Dasakak, and that includes T.T. Waterman, who was a Smithsonian ethnologist who was sent by the Smithsonian in 1922, again, to look at which kutia and village sites were still extant in Southeast Alaska, to document them, and in the process to interview people about all kinds of the geographic place names. If you've read Thornton's book, a lot of the southern Southeast was based on Waterman's notes. He took some incredible notes on many of the place names in that extreme southern Southeast part of Alaska. So I, in consultation with Richard and Joel, have decided not to show you the map because I know that this recording will go online and it's a sensitive space that doesn't have enough protection at Dasakak. So I won't be showing you the maps, but I did want to show you the notes that accompany the different houses and kutia that were at Dasakak. He used a Boaz orthography, which I'm not familiar with all of this as a non-linguist, but there's some incredible information. And I also just wanted to point out, the person that he really spoke with, T.T. Waterman spoke with about Dasakak in particular, was Peter Williams, Nawishketl. He was Tantakwan Ganachadi, and even though he's Tantakwan Tlingit, he grew up in Metlakatla, which remember was an old Tantakwan village of Takwani. So he still lived amongst the Tsimshian. There were many Tantakwan Tlingit who lived amongst the Tsimshian there on Annette Island. And then he was later removed to Ketchikan, as you can see in this famous photograph by the Tsimshian photographer B.A. Haldane. And some of you might know Dr. Michaela D'Angeli's work. She's published some amazing work on B.A. Haldane. I really wanted to ask her more because if you zoom in on this photograph of the young Peter Williams, he has a photograph of someone tucked in his pocket. And it seems to be a woman. So I don't know, Michaela, she's just starting a new job, so she hasn't had time to respond to my email about this, if she knows about this particular photograph, but I'm so interested in it. Anyway, he grew up in Takwani in Metlakatla, but his father had lived at Dasakak and still remembered a lot of the houses there. So this was who T.T. Waterman was speaking with about the different houses in Kutia. Okay, so let's go into a few of the polls. I won't have time to go into all of them. There are 8 polls from Dasakak at the Totem Heritage Center. And this first one is a mortuary pole. You can see on the back side of the pole in that photo on the right, the recess in the pole where remains could have been stored. There were no remains when they found it in 1969. But this depicts a man holding a sculpin. It's believed to be a sculpin bottom fish, and then a club in his hand. And at one time, It's difficult to see because there are all these poles clustered around, but he does have some figure or crest at the top, and it's really hard to make out, was that a frog? Is that a wolf? Which would be so important to know more if this was Ganachadi, if this was Tequedi or Dakwedi. So there's so much. When I was putting this talk together, I was like, what do I actually have to tell them? I have more questions than any answers on this. But look at the carving too. It's really beautiful carving, even though it's, had been standing out from the 1850s to the 1960s. So 110 years, some of these poles. T.T. Waterman noted he actually skipped over this pole, which is so frustrating to me. If you see, he goes from poles 1 and 2 in House A at the top, and then under the line, he goes to pole 4, 5, and 6. And when the Totem Heritage Center, their maps showed where they got this particular mortuary pole, and I really think it's pole 3, but I'm not sure if it's aligned with Buchhit. So you can see he recorded all the Tlingit words, Buchhit, and then House B was Keetit, killer whale house. 5-minute warning, oh no. So I should hurry up. Anyway, so many questions about these poles. This is another one that's in the Totem Heritage Center. You can see the bear at the top and this killer whale, and just look. I love how the tail curves in here to encapsulate this face. It's just beautiful carving. I'm so interested in this Tongass carving. Again, the Waterman notes that talk about which house that this pole was associated with. And this is a source of great confusion to me that I wanted to ask if there are folks who specialize in the southern, southeast region. I'm really trying to understand when Waterman and others reference wolf. As you probably know, in the southern southeast, the wolf moiety was used more often than eagle as the opposites of raven. But what's confusing to me is that sometimes wolf seems to reference the moiety, and sometimes it seems to reference a clan. And what I can't figure out always is which is which. There are certain houses that Waterman labeled as bear, which is almost certainly Tequedi, a wolf moiety clan. But then wolf killer whale would probably be Daklawedi, which is another wolf clan or a wolf clan in southern southeast. Anyway, if any of you have studied these, let me know, because I'd love some help. I don't think I have time to go into all of these poles. I've just been so interested in the kind of longevity of some of these crests from Tongass Island, Village Island, into Ketchikan. This is a CCC pole on the right, and if you look closely, this killer whale originally had that beautiful, I think it was probably white, but a white diagonal stripe across the surface, and these crests continue from one Tontaquan village to the next. This is the Fog Woman memorial, originally from Village Island, and you can see Fog Woman holding the 2 salmon that Raven was so delighted she made, and then treated her very poorly. But that's the original at Dasachach. And then importantly, that comes into Ketchikan with the famous Chief Johnson pole, if you've been downtown. This was from Kajukhit, which Waterman documented at Dasachach. And then when Chief Johnson of Kajukhit moves to Ketchikan, he also erects this fog woman with Kajuk at the very top. So again, trying to trace some of these crests and kutia from one village to the next. By the way, that's Richard Jackson there in the photograph. Okay, I think I just have to skip all the polls. I'm so sorry. I didn't really... I wanted to end by saying what happened to Dasachach, because this, a lot of scholars have said that the Tontaquan moved to Tongass Island once the U.S. military fort was built there in 1868, right after the U.S. purchase in 1867. And this is the famous Edward Muybridge photograph taken in 1868, shortly after the fort had been built just on the backside of Tongass Island. What I wanted to say, though, is that Tongass people really contest that chronology. They have always said in the Goldschmidt and Haas testimony that they did in the 1940s, and in the Waterman manuscript from the 1920s, they've always said, we went to Tongass Island and then the soldiers came. So they were there first. These are just some quotes like George Keegan Williams, who is the son of Peter Williams. Our people moved from Village Island near Duke Island. This was way before white people came here. My father told me he was living at Tongass Village on Tongass Island when the first American soldiers came there. So that's an important chronology to Tontaquan people. And I know I'm out of time. Can I just share this last letter? This was a letter I found at the Presbyterian Historical Society from 1886. And this is a letter from Lewis Paul, who himself was Docloady. He was married to Tilly Paul, and he is the one who drowns, taking the missionary Samuel Saxman to look for a site for a school when they were going to move the school for Tongass people. And I was so struck by this letter because he writes to Sheldon Jackson here in Sitka. And he says that I received your letters about the building at Naha. This was a school that was going to be built at present day, what we call Loring, just north of Ketchikan, Naha. Apparently Sheldon Jackson wanted to build the new school for Tongass people there in Naha, but he says it would be useless for me to try them to move because I know just as plain what they want, and what can I do at Naha? There will be a schoolhouse and teachers and nobody to teach. I want to work while I got some work to do. I don't want to be idle. And what he advocates for on the second page is that he says, we hope and pray that the board would change their mind about the building at Naha. If you have a building at Port Chester, which is on Annette Island where Metlakatla is now, their old village of Taquani, it would be a great deal different. We will have Haidas, Cape Fox, and Tongass together at Port Chester. Note, this is from June 24th, 1886. He drowns in December 1886. And then, of course, Father Duncan comes in 1887. So it's a really... it's just interesting to me to study all these kinds of interchanges between the Tontaquan in their homelands, the Tsimshian who are going to move into this space, and some of the Poles from Dasachach. So I'm sorry I didn't time it well to share all of those with you, but I'm happy to share anything afterwards. Gunalchish.